Hello and good afternoon to you wherever you are at the moment. And welcome to this Target Jobs webinar on virtual onboarding, workplace etiquette, and managing your virtual work-life balance. This is one of our regular Thursday webinars to help you make the most of your career during what is obviously a very difficult time. My name is Matt. I'm the editor for Target Jobs Law, but I'm also going to be your host for today. And I just want to run through a couple of very, very quick ground rules before we begin. It's the same ground rules we always have for these webinars. Please feel free to ask questions at any time. We're going to go through a few sort of pre-selected talking points that we thought would be interesting and useful to you. But you can ask questions at any time, and please use the upvote system. So if you look on the right-hand side, you've got a little question bar, and if you click the question that you want answered, and upvote it so that we get to the ones with the most upvotes first when we come to answer questions at the end. Thank you very much for that. I'm now going to introduce you to Kate Eady. She is a graduate advisor at Adelshaw Goddard. And Kate, I'm going to ask you just to say a little bit about yourself and where you work to start off with.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Matt. And hi, everybody. Nice to virtually meet you all. As Matt said, I work for Adelshaw Goddard and I'm one of the graduate advisors within the team. My role, I predominantly look after our Scotland trainees. So I look after the recruitment and the development side of things. And I also look after our international trainees as well. But I do help out with England. We're quite a close-knit team, so there's a lot of crossover. I am based in the Manchester office, although, as with everybody, we are working from home at the moment. And I did used to commute quite regularly up to Scotland to see our trainees. We will move on more to the talking point, but just to reassure you, we are continuing as normal with everything. I've learned the whole virtual world side of things now for virtual onboarding and recruitment, which has been really interesting considering I joined the team last January. Had a handover of how everything works in the office, and then, as you can tell, when March came along, that went out the window and we had to learn a whole new way of working. So I've got lots of information, and I can tell you plenty about virtual onboarding and virtual recruitment sessions, and hopefully answer any questions and reassure you as well if you're a little bit worried because you're not too sure how to do things in the virtual world. So do just let us know by asking your questions.
Thank you very much, Kate. And you were saying that you've, a lot of your entire recruitment process has gone virtual at the moment.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that later on, but we've kept the normal sort of first and second stage, which is obviously your application form, and then we actually have a process of a voice recorded interview, and these are both blind. Where we've had to change the process is for the assessment centre, because normally you'd come into the office, you'd get to meet everybody there who's taking part in the assessment day. We've actually there's a lot of systems out there now that actually developed quite quickly. So we have a platform in place called Forage, where we've actually been able to mirror the assessment centre exactly the same as it would be in the office. So you get your face-to-face time. We've set it up. The only difference is it's via video. But you do get your one-on-one time as you would within a meeting room, and we can pop all the tasks for you to complete on the virtual platform. And funnily enough, at the beginning of the assessment centre, I'll say you will enjoy it, and and you can see the candidates are just thinking, no, I won't. This is, they're nervous, they don't know what to accept. But by the end of it, everybody has always said how surprised they were and how it wasn't that different to actually being in the office and being face-to-face. So they do get a lot from that. We also have virtual placement schemes as well. So normally candidates would come into the office for a placement. We mirrored that last year, and over 3 days, well, there was 2 separate sessions over 2 weeks, but for the 2 sessions combined, we actually saw 89 students join us and complete a 3-day placement. And as part of that, we still did all of the networking and everything that you would normally get, because normally you'd attend a lunch and you'd be able to walk around a room and go and speak to relevant different people within the firm. So we actually utilised Zoom and had quite a number of people from the firm, all different levels, come along, and they were in various breakout rooms, and we just moved people around in small numbers. So you just get to have sort of a virtual lunch basically and get some time with each and move around. So we also did a virtual online escape rooms to help you sort of, break the ice and speak to people. That was not as part of the assessments. Don't worry, that wasn't marked or anything like that. That was just for fun. So we do try, and because we want to, you've got to remember with the recruitment process, it's a two-way thing. So yes, you're a candidate going along and selling yourself, saying, I'm great, I want you to hire me. But you got to remember the firm has also got to tell you how great it is to work there and show you the real environment as much as possible. So it is a two-way thing, because you're deciding, do you want to work for them? So they should be trying to show you as much as possible, which is what we try and do as part of the recruitment process. Again, we had really good feedback from the placement schemes. We then made offers last year, and in September we virtually onboarded, I think it was 33 trainees across the England and Scotland offices. We've then had a further intake in March with a slightly smaller intake of another 6 trainees, but they've carried on in the virtual world. A lot of them haven't even been in the office since back when they had their interviews a couple of years ago. But we've put a lot of virtual, we have things in place such as coffee roulette and things like that, where you rotate around and speak to a different trainee each couple of weeks, just so you get that face time. So there are a lot of things that can be put in place that make virtual working easier, and you're not missing out on so much that you think you would from not being in the office.
Thank you so much for clarifying so much of that, because I think that there is a certain perception that virtual assessment centres are going to be wildly different from when you're doing it in person. But I think for a lot of the people we've had on, and when we've done these webinars, have always said, actually, it's not so different. You're going to be doing the same tasks. You're going to be meeting similar kinds of people. And it actually sounds like you've taken some of the weight off of networking as well, because when you are networking and you're there and you have to make the effort, you have to be the one that gets up. You have to be the one that goes and speaks to someone. But if you're being moved around in a virtual room, it's going to happen whether you have the bravery to get out of your chair or not. So it sounds like that some of the stress has kind of been taken away, and seeing as you're not dealing with something that requires a lot of hands-on work, such as engineering or medicine, where you need to actively be in a lab, or you need to actively be applying that kind of skill to a physical substance. You can get by with a lot more of it. So thank you very much for clarifying that, because it has come up a few times in the past. I think it's quite good to start with the kind of, as you say, you've been onboarding people, and you've had sounds like a really quite huge intake of trainees as well. What are the golden rules for working remotely? I think is the thing that we need to start with, the very basics. Where do we set up that computer? What do we need to be mindful of? And how do we need to behave? But have you got any tips you could offer us?
I've got quite a few tips, to be honest, because you've got to remember, first and foremost, we were all completely lost when this first happened last year. So everybody you speak to will have felt at some point how you're feeling now, which is a little bit like, oh, this is new. How do I navigate this? We were introduced to Microsoft Teams overnight. As a firm, we were used to sort of having numerous meetings throughout the day, buzzing about in different meeting views. All of a sudden, we were at home and we have Microsoft Teams. So you will pick it up quite quickly. And just to reassure you that everybody has been in this situation, I've been to a few different webinars throughout last year to help, and there was plenty of tips on there that I've picked up, and I'll share those with you. For me, one of the biggest things is having a designated workspace. Where I live currently, I've got the living room, the dining room table, and the kitchen is all kind of in the one room in the flat where I live. So at first, it was quite difficult to have a designated first workspace, and then you get into the work-life balance, kind of you can't differentiate the two. I'm lucky enough that I have got a spare room, so I've been able to I'm not in there today simply because we've just had a workman in, but normally I go in the spare room, because then at the end of the day I can close the door and that's work finished. And I think it's important for you to have that cut off. Some people don't have the luxury of having a spare room, and it means they're either in the living room, dining room, or basically in the common living space. They might even be in the bedroom. Even if that is the case, I would still have a designated space where possible, and that's your workspace. And even if you're just having yourself a drawer or having your laptop bag there, so at the end of the day, you're putting your work stuff away, and you just mentally then that's work finished and you're closed off. So you're not, because I think in the absence of a commute, you know, normally you used to drive home or get the bus home and you'd gradually switch off, whereas you push a button and turn your laptop off and your head's still buzzing with everything. So allow yourself to have that time to sort of, like I said, close off from work. Another top tip that I got, which may help you certainly prepare for your day, is create a fake commute. So normally you sort of mentally prepare yourself. You'd go to, on your way into work, you might get your coffee and things like that. Go for a walk in the morning. And even if that's popping in the shop and getting a coffee, because it sort of has a start to your day. And then obviously you set yourself up, you get yourself a drink and get yourself good to go in your virtual workspace. Another tip is also communication, because sometimes it can feel quite lonely. So just make sure that you've where possible, you're touching base with your main office or your team members once, twice a day. Just sort of get the feel for, obviously you've got to find the balance of how busy people are to try and get some face time. The one thing I think is very, very difficult when you're working from home is normally in the office and you've got a question, you can see when somebody's busy or not, but to ask the question. Where possible, what I try and do is, because I've got designated time booked in with my supervisor, I write down things that I need to talk to them about, because then when it comes to my designated time, I've got my list there in front of me and everything to cover off. Obviously, there are instances where it can't go on a list and can't wait and you'd speak them, but that's another thing I find really useful. I call it my Shannon book because my manager's Shannon, so I just write everything down in my Shannon book and then we discuss it when we do catch up. And obviously, because most people have a to-do list and you know, you find that useful. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I can think of. The main thing is quite obvious, finding a quiet spot where you're not really going to be disturbed. Make sure you can, if you're living with anybody, make sure you communicate in times of when you are kind of really need to be quiet and not disturbed if you've got certain meetings. And where possible, have somewhere with a bit of natural light, because that will help with your mood as well. If you can see, I mean, it's not been great weather recently, so that's not going to lift anybody's mood, but where you can get a bit of natural light in, that really helps me as well.
Thank you so much, because I think there's some that psychological barrier. I think the first thing that you mentioned is have your dedicated workspace. And I know we've talked about this on previous webinars where we're talking about how you need to organize your working day. And it really is just building a connection, and it can be really difficult if you are just in a. So I'll give you an example. When I've worked in a previous job, I was in a studio flat, and I was working as a freelancer. Our studio flat had one chair and one desk and a coffee table, and that was it. And in order to get the work done, because that work could sometimes go on into the night as well, you had to make that differentiation. Right, when I am at the desk and the laptop is set up on the desk, that is work time. All the various peripherals that you need, this is where I'm going to do the work. If the laptop's on the coffee table, that probably means you're going to be watching the equivalent of Netflix. But it's such a small barrier, but it made such a difference to, you know, if you were to do it on that every day, sit on the sofa every day with the coffee table, with your laptop, eventually you get into that habit of just feeling, even when you're trying to relax, that you're working. So it's important for your well-being, I think, to have that designated space, even to have designated clothes. And I think even after a sort of a year, once this pandemic has stretched on and on, you know, make sure that you wear the same T-shirts that you do every day for work if you don't have to be on camera and you don't have to look professional. It's all about building those spaces. As you say, natural light, just some really sort of excellent examples of how to get yourself really in that mindset that this is my professional environment, this is how I'm going to work today. I think it's that. Thank you. I just wanted to highlight a couple of those for anybody out there. I know we've covered touched on these sorts of things in the past, but I think it was a really, really clear example. And notes as well. I think that's the other thing, is when you're saying like the Shannon book, you know, if you can write it down, it really, I know it's so much easier to do with apps these days, and you can have to-do lists and stuff. But when you're on a video call with someone, if you're constantly kind of looking down at your phone or something, if you've got a notepad in front of you, people go, oh, well, it's a notepad. Yeah, they're taking lists. It's fine. If you're sitting there on your phone and they think, is he playing Tetris or is he really paying attention? So it's just having that list, having it written down in clear bullet points, easy to read, means that you've got everything organized in your mind and on your notepad. And you're absolutely good to go. I think it was really, really excellent advice there. Thank you so much, Kate. So we have to ask, because you know, if you're virtually onboarding and maybe even at an assessment centre, the first time that you're going to come into contact with some of your colleagues, what's the way to make a good impression on video? And that's really quite a tricky one, I think.
It is a tricky one, yeah. But I think the main thing is, first of all, make sure that have a little practice run. And if any technical issues happen for whatever reason, it is not a problem. It doesn't form part of the assessment for us. And I always try and put candidates at ease. But the reason why I'm saying this is more for your benefit, because when candidates do have a technical issue, then that throws them off and sets them off on the bad foot. And a couple of times when we've joined a video, somebody's sound's not working, and I feel so sorry for them because they're all set up and ready to go and really prepared, and then you have to stop them and kind of say, we can't hear you, and then they've got to try and suss out how to fix the microphone. So just have yourself a little practice run before you join the meeting to make sure that your sound and your video are working. Again, like there's a standard running joke of you're on mute. We all say it on one call at least 5 times a day. So if it does happen, don't worry, make light of it and move on, because it's happened, on anybody you speak to who works virtually will have had some form of disturbance or anything like that. So don't let it throw you if it does happen. But what I'm trying to say is just do a little test to try and remove that from possibly happening. Top one for me is always remember to smile. It is strange when you first start coming on video, but you'll be surprised how quickly you get used to it. Just remember you're having a conversation with somebody about yourself. So just try and mirror how you would be in a normal in-office environment, and just smile. When they're talking, remember you'd normally nod and sort of listen along. So just think about your body language so they know that you're engaged. A top tip I attended from one of the webinars was when somebody else is speaking, try to look at the camera when they're talking, because you're tempted to look at them. And if you can see, I'm not actually, from them looking at me, I'm not actually looking at them. So it's good for you to actually look into the camera so they feel like you're making eye contact, because that is a big one. That's whether that's in person or virtual. People, you like eye contact, somebody's engaged with you if they're looking at you. Also think about the angle of your camera. I've actually got a laptop stand here, and I find that helps me, because if the laptop's higher, I sit up straight, and that will sort of help you be sort of more engaged. Whereas there's something about the way that you sit, I think, helps you sort of helps everything. You're more positive with the way that you sat if you've got good posture. So try and sort of maintain your posture, and that helps. Even if I've seen people put the laptops on a cardboard box, you've got to remember the assessors can't see what you're propping it up on, but just make sure you've got a nice comfortable workspace where the camera, where possible, is at your eye level. And like I said, similar to what I said before, lighting, where possible, try and get some good lighting so they can see you. I've actually invested in it wasn't much money, it was a social media light, and you can sort of put it behind the laptop if you're in a particularly dark room. And then the other thing is that, and this one happens a lot, for not just in assessments, try and resist the urge to get distracted. So if anything pops up or anything like that, try and ignore it, because what you don't want to do is during an interview is look distracted. So just try and ignore anything. Like I said, just stare at the camera where possible.
Thank you. And I think that's so I don't do that very often, don't stare at the camera. And that's because I'm normally monitoring the question feed or something like that. But I know exactly what you mean. And if there are any engineering students on this call and they can work out how to get a camera that's right in the middle of your Zoom kind of screen, please make that happen. So the number one complaint I think we've always had out of employers when we've been doing virtual events and when we've had, talking about virtual assessment centers is always the tech issues. And one of my colleagues, my target job editors, actually has some sort of suggestions on this, which is because one, be aware of when your camera's on so that you know when to smile, and you know when to, even if you're on a meeting and you're just listening to someone, if your camera's on, don't sit there with that kind of dead-eyed sort of, you're just listening, paying attention. You need to have a bit of a smile. You need to show that you're engaged, nod or move, because that may be the only indication that people have that you're actually paying attention, when they're just looking at a little box on their screen. So pay attention to your camera and microphone. But the one that I thought was really good was particularly when we have been stuck in lockdowns, and I know it's getting a bit easier now, is to get the family or get the housemates or get whoever else is in the house to go out for their exercise. If you really have something important that you need to be on screen for, get them to go out, because it frees up the bandwidth on your internet. and it means you're much less likely to get those dropouts, which can be really, really frustrating. And as you say, it's always a two-way process, and recruiters are always going to try to make the effort to get in touch with you if you do have technical issues. But don't make it as easy as possible. Just free up that bandwidth, keep everything going really smoothly. And yes, light as well. I have a relative who's a photographer, and it's all about whether you get the light at the side or whether you get the light coming from in front of you. But what you kind of really don't want is, or you need to compensate for with the social media light, is you don't want the light coming from behind you. And I think when we first started during the pandemic, we had so many instances where we tried to have a webinar and someone would sit with the window directly behind them with this halo of light, which looks very kind of majestic, but obviously you can't see that person at all, and you can't see what they're saying, and it's very difficult to follow. So yeah, really excellent, just super practical things to be aware of, as well as obviously the usuals, which is make sure that your the background behind you is at least tidy, that you haven't got like kind of mess all over the room or something, or angle the camera away from that. Try to find that blank wall that looks nice and tidy. So are there things we've already talked about? A number of things, like you need to be aware of your tech and your lighting and your just your professional appearance and everything like that. But are there, what is it about remote working? Are there aspects of remote working that mean that you have to work harder, do you think, compared to when you're in an office with people?
Yeah, I think obviously the number one thing that springs to my mind is your networking and you getting to know people. We've obviously got a cohort of trainees that have joined us, and the trainees are normally quite close as a group, but the first years that joined in September have not met many of the second year trainees now in person, because they've not been in the office together. So I think networking is quite a difficult one. I think there is a lot of value in popping where possible, because everybody has been new in a role at some point. So everybody should understand that, even if you just pop 15 minutes in with somebody when they've got free time, just to have a coffee, and particularly just think about the people that you want to speak to when you join, that you'd normally make, you're not got the luxury of bumping into them, making a coffee together, but think about who you would like to speak to and just asking them if you could pop some time in. The worst they will say is, no, I can't make that day, but then they'll rearrange it for you. So try and compensate for that, for the lack of networking. Because obviously normally there'd be things that you can socialise with, because we've lost all of that as well. From the working side, there's none of the socialising after work or anything. So just where possible, try and make up for that by just a starting point. Like I said, is putting a cup of tea in, or a coffee, whichever your drink of choice is. I think it's also very difficult to get a feel for the culture of somewhere. That's one thing that we've found when we've run sort of campus events last year in the run up to recruitment. That's the main question I've been asked, is getting a feel for the culture, which is why we put certain networking events. And you can't feel the same in-office experience, but certainly going on to a Zoom call with a number of people and talking to different people, you can get a feel for it. I would always recommend utilising LinkedIn as well. We've got a tool there that we don't use enough of. You can connect with plenty of people within the firm, and we've had instances where the trainees have told me that candidates have actually contacted them on LinkedIn and just asked a little bit about the firm, and you will get a feel for what an individual person is like. And then when you meet the next person, if they've got similarities, that's how you'll start to get a feel for how the firm is, because if they're all saying the same thing, that's the way that it is in that particular business. I think when you're actually remotely in an interview, or if you're on a sort of a group session virtually, I think sometimes you can feel it's difficult to get your point across. If there's a couple of people speaking, you kind of do that awkward thing where you're like trying to sort of say something, and sometimes you feel like the moment's passed and now I can't say my point. I would always say don't be shy to bring it back to that point. There's always tools you can use on a call, such as obviously we've got the chat on here, but there's normally little things like a hand raising function and things like that. So you can always try to flag up and say, hi, I want to say something. So don't ever be shy and think I've missed my point, because normally when you're in a room full of people, it's never, unless you're listening to somebody, you're never only allowed to have one person speaking at once, whereas we have that thing where we always clash on every call. Two people speak at the same time. It's just hard to get used to timing your moment. Or if you me, I've never got used to it and we're a year in, but somehow you just end up managing to get your point across. I think in an interview environment, it may feel hard to calm your nerves, because normally when you go into a room, you get from somebody's body language, they can sort of feel calming. So just try to remember what I said before, which is you're just having a conversation, and it's not that much different to what you do in the office. Don't put too much pressure on yourself because it's virtual, still the same concepts. So try and sort of calm yourself down there. And then again, it goes back to what I was mentioning before, which is it's hard for your body language and you can overthink it. So try not to. Like I said, as long as you're sitting up straight, you should naturally kind of get a good posture. That would keep you upbeat as well with your conversation. You'll come across as more positive. And like I said before as well, when you're listening to somebody, smile and nod along, because then they know that you're listening to them. So I think you do have to think a little bit more when you're working virtually, but also don't overthink it, because you will naturally just fall into it quite easily.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's so there's some, that thing about body language, and this I've started doing this since one of my colleagues mentioned it. If anybody out there is watching and you want to go and refer to it, we did a webinar with the editors about contacting employers, and one of the things is your body language needs to show on screen. So you need to have your hands somewhere that people can see. If you are an expressive person and you do talk with your hands, you need to make sure they're in shot. You can't have them. You can't. If you're doing this, all people can see is a little blur in the background. But you do need to be kind of really expressive. You need to be aware of that, and it can sometimes help. It can sometimes put people at ease. And likewise, you need to be really proactive with contacting people. Was another thing that we talked about during that webinar. And LinkedIn is a good example. If you go onto the review that, we talk about an elevator pitch. Don't use the LinkedIn standard message that says, "Hello, my name is Jim. I want to connect." Say a little bit about who you are. Hello, I'm a student of, if you were contacting Adult Shore God, I'm a law student and I'm really interested, or I'm doing my GDL and I'm really interested in becoming a trainee and I just want to find out more about this. Could you spare me 5 minutes? And that, as well as the networking when you're actually in the workplace, require you to be proactive. It requires you to reach out to people. As you say, you organize networking events, which is really useful because it's a structured thing that you're there for. But you can make that time yourself. You just have to reach out to people and be confident when you're going out and contacting people that they're not some alien untouchable force. They are people and they will want to talk to you as well. They'll be happy to give up a little bit of time for you.
If anything, we want to talk to you because we've been in lockdown as well. So we welcome, we're like, oh, a new face. We'll definitely talk to you. So please do. Don't be shy to reach out to anyone, because I'm sure they'd welcome a fresh face and somebody new to talk to.
And it really is, we always, I think when we're children, and you're petting animals or something, they say, oh, it's just as afraid of you as you are of it. And it's kind of the same a little bit with recruitment. Don't want to compare you to animals and things, but it's that you need to be aware that these are people too, and they're having a hard time as well with the pandemic, and they're having a hard time adjusting to virtual onboarding and everything else. So they are going to be feeling the same things that you were feeling when it's kind of, is this a new thing? How do I adapt to this? How do I learn from this? Anyway, yeah, it's just being aware of that, being mindful of that, I think can help put you a little bit more at ease when you're going out and contacting people. So I'm just going to be a little bit conscious of time and just make sure that we do have time for questions. So what sort of equipment do we think we need when working from home? We touched a little bit on the technical specifications. Is there anything on top of that? I mean, we mentioned social media lights, laptop stands.
Yeah, I think an important one for me is everybody thinks technology straight away, and that's what we all did when we first went into lockdown. But think about your chair and how you're going to sit, because you're sitting down for a lot of the days, and make sure you're properly supported, whether that's just getting a suitable backrest rather than investing in an office chair. So always be mindful of how you sit. My top tip would be a stand from a laptop, because you can also extend that, so you could work standing up, because you will get tired of sitting down so much, because I do think we do sit down a little bit more when we're working from home, because normally you have to get, like, the kettle is 4 steps away over there for me, whereas in the office I'd have to walk quite a distance. Obviously, another tip that I found recently was it's always good to have a power bank. I've got 2 USB ports in my laptop, and I've got my phone charger, I've got a little plug-in because I've got a portable mouse and keyboard. That's my 2 plugs used, but I've also got a headset that needs plugging in and different things. So get yourself a power bank, because then you've got more plugs. If you want a Bluetooth headset, to be honest, the list is endless really, because it depends on you. So just think about what you need to do your day-to-day and make you comfortable. And it goes back to sort of setting up your workspace. A lot of people have wanted a second monitor. So if you're working a lot with spreadsheets and things like that, you do that horrible thing where your nose is pressed up against the screen on a laptop. So if you might want a second screen, because then you can sort of set yourself out and you can read things a lot easier. So it just depends on the role that you're doing and you as an individual, and what do you need in the office, right? Well, it's highly likely that you'll probably need that working from home as well. So they're my top tips. The power bank is a big one, because I've just not got enough plugs on my laptop.
I absolutely agree. And that second monitor as well can sometimes be a real, USB hubs, so you can connect absolutely everything to absolutely everything else. Power banks to make sure everything's charged and it's got all connected up. I found even if you're using like a second screen that's an iPad or something, or a tablet of some kind, get a power bank for that as well, so you can charge it while it's sitting there. Get a little, get a small kind of Bluetooth keyboard. The only thing I would say is I found with Bluetooth headsets, depending on the software that you're using, you might want to try and do something wired. That's why I use wired for these webinars that we do, is because you can get distortion if you've got a lot of information going back and forth over your bandwidth, as well as with the Bluetooth. It can sometimes be a bit tricky, but I think really sort of valid for depending on what you need to do. If you're going to need to refer to things, make sure you have everything you need in place. Thank you so much, Kate. I think it's really useful. So how about meetings? When we talk about workplace etiquette, we're talking about, it's your networking and reaching out to people and everything else. What should we do during meetings? We've started to sort of cover this already.
Yeah, I will gladly share this with you, because I learned the hard way. Because like I said, we just went straight into these in March. I would say, when we very first went into lockdown, everyone was a little bit camera shy. And I think when it's a smaller meeting, that makes the meeting harder. Firstly, because you're more likely to get distracted, because you're not on camera. So you'll start, and you won't always be listening then. And secondly, if you're talking to somebody, it's much more engaging if they're on camera. So for smaller meetings, I would always recommend that you're on camera, because we're missing that FaceTime, and you're getting to know people more, and it's easier to build a relationship. Strangely, within lockdown, I know some people are saying obviously that it has its disadvantages, but I actually feel like I know my colleagues a lot more now, because you have general conversation, not just work, that way. And if you're on camera, it will help to get to know the individual better and build your relationships from there. Larger meetings, I would always recommend, when you're not speaking, just have yourself on mute, so there's no background noise, and it's easier, because if everybody does that, it's easier to hear the content of the meeting. Depending on the size of the meeting and what everybody else is doing, you may or may not want to be on camera. But again, when you're speaking, always try to go on camera so people can see you. Touching on, again, what I've said before, is use the resources available. So if you want to ask a question, you utilize the chat function or the hand raising. We do always, as part of the placement scheme, we say that if somebody's giving a talk, at the end, I'll have a look at who's got the hand raised, and then we'll come back to you and go through your questions. So that's always a useful one. And always write down your questions as you go. So if it's something like this, where there's a talk going on, you think of something, write it down, because then when it comes to question time, you've obviously got your list there in front of you. So they're the main things for me.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, we've both been, from the sounds of it, through that learning experience of, okay, how does this work? How does that work? And yeah, just being aware that when you're on mute, be on camera when you're speaking, all that kind of stuff. I couldn't have it. I think that's the absolute perfect rundown of the sort of need to knows of company meetings. When everybody's remote working outside of meetings, how can you? I think if you were advising someone now, how would you sort of recommend that they manage up, which is sort of reassuring the team that I am working, I have a strong work ethic, I'm getting on with things, but I also I also need to get training, I also need things, and I need input. Have you got any advice on how you can sort of juggle that kind of, I am definitely head down in the work, but I also really need to do something else?
Yeah, I think it all goes, for me, I think commercial awareness is a biggie that comes into this. As long as keep an awareness of everything that's going on within the team, because then you can naturally think where you can add value based on your skill set, but you can also pinpoint and think, oh, I don't know too much about that, so that would really help with my development. So you can always then say, I'd really like to support you and get involved in any way that I can. So always try and keep an awareness of what's going on, and where possible, as I was saying before, I've got 2 catch-ups a week with my supervisor, and I find those really, really helpful, because we have everything that I'm working on, but then I try and gain an understanding of what they're working on as well, because I always want to think about how I can then fit into that. I think it's also helpful from the beginning with your team to sort of explain your working style, because everybody does things differently. I'm quite visual, so I always share that with people, because if you just quickly reel off some instructions to me, I need to take a step back first of all, visualize it, and then I can go. So always sort of share that, because that helps people when you are supporting them, that helps them sort of manage you in the right kind of way, because it is a two-way thing. I also would recommend that you always, when you're discussing things and you're saying, you might get to the point where you think, oh, I'm always asking questions and I don't want to. Ask as many questions as possible, because that is how you learn things. But also don't be shy. One thing I always say is, I'd approach that like this. This is what I do. What do you think? And then people can see how your mindset works and how you would approach things, and that you've given it a go. And then they might come back and say, no, okay, don't do it that way. But at least they can see your train of thought. So I that's my top tip, because that always helps, because then they've shown that you've gone away and thought about it, rather than you thinking, I want to help, but I don't know how. And you don't want to just constantly ask questions.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes time to have one-to-ones with the person who's directly managing you. And if it's not in place already, you might want to consider saying, hey, I would find this really useful just for 10 minutes, once or twice a week, just to know what you're working on, how I fit into that, and what I'm working on, and how you need me to work. And that thing about, I think when you're very early in your career, it's difficult necessarily to know the best way that you do learn and adapt in a workplace, because it might be different from the way that you've learned and adapt in university. So it's one of the key things that I think you've got to be aware of, and you've got to be thinking about when you first go into a workplace is, how do I learn? How do I absorb information best? How do I, how would I choose to present information? Because you may find it really annoying to put together a huge spreadsheet, and you'll even struggle to concentrate on it yourself. But if you take that same information and you put it into a little infographic in one of these kind of instant things, and it displays the information in a very readable, digestible fashion to anybody, including you, you might want to start saying, well, look, I know all the figures, I know I need to have these, but this is the way that I find them easiest to understand, and I hope it helps you as well. And someone might say to me, no, I just want to see the raw spreadsheet, but at least you start to learn that way. You go, okay, well, this is how I learn. If you could present it to me like this, then it would take me much less time to work on this. But if I know I need to present it to you, I need to just grab the raw data and send you that, because that's the way that you work. But I think it is very difficult, and I think it takes a little bit of learning and experimentation. You need to actively be asking yourself those questions when you first start in a workplace, and I think that's probably the hardest sort of hurdle to get over in one of those kind of virtual onboarding situations as well, because you are learning too many new things.
Yeah, and there's no set right or wrong either with this. So when we roll out, because we do supervisor training for when we have new supervisors who are going to look after the trainees, and obviously we had to roll out different type of training when we went into lockdown, and supervisors often say, well, how often should I be catching up? Well, that depends on the trainee, because one trainee might want to catch up every day, but another trainee might be fine to run things themselves and just have one a week. So don't be shy to say what you want and how you will work best, because they can then manage your expectations. It's really on you to sort of say how you want to be managed, I think, and then you can work together on that.
Definitely, but be honest about it as well. Don't say, yeah, of course I can handle that on my own, it'll be fine. You have no idea what you're doing, and you're just going to come back, terrified in a week's time and go, I didn't really know what I was doing. Make sure you know what you're about. But yeah, like obviously, if that's the way that you work best, then stick to it. But make sure it's genuine, make sure it's honest. It's just a quick caveat there before anybody goes, yeah, of course, I can do everything.
That's why I said there's no right or wrong way, because you might need every day, or some days you might have it booked in, and some days you say, actually, I don't need a catch up today. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the last one I want to cover, so I just want to make sure that we do have time to take the questions that have come into the feed. So I'm just going to skip to the sort of very last sort of talking point we had, which was how can you build a social life when working from home? And I'm, particularly in relation to work, I suppose, getting along with new colleagues and maybe, your peers, your in your case, it would be trainees, getting along with other trainees.
This is something we've had trial and error on for sure. I think originally you want to get everybody together, but then unless there's an event on, because we're all quizzed out now, let's be honest, everybody was doing the virtual quizzes last year. So unless you're running an event when there's a group, it's hard for you to all sort of interact. So I would always say smaller groups, and either use the technique of what I was saying before, where you could have one huge Zoom call and then various breakout rooms, and you can socialize that way. Or the coffee roulette that I mentioned before is obviously it sounds like it's organized fun when I explain it this way, but it's basically a spreadsheet and you mix up and you have time with different people. There's lots of different things you can obviously do together. I think a competition is a good one. It's always a good way to throw something in. So we had a Strava competition between us, because then obviously that gets quite competitive. So it's not always about just the general socializing, because not everybody always wants to sit on a laptop for later. So you can have a bit of healthy competition as well, because that boosts communication. But again, just genuinely think about things that everybody enjoys doing and natural things. And then we can try and socialize and have meetups. Now the restrictions start to ease. We're seeing some of the trainees are meeting up just as maybe a group of 6 in the park and having a coffee. They're sort of planning to move towards that. But just try sort of slowly start off with smaller groups, particularly more if it's virtual, because as I was saying before, when there's a larger group, it's just impossible. When you've got about 15 people on a call, you're not all going to be able to speak at the same time. Well, you can, but you wouldn't understand any of it. So just break it down and trial and error. That's what we find. And, don't just cancel something because not everybody can attend, because they'll always attend the next one. So that's one thing we found at the beginning, where it's like, 2 people can't attend, or we'll leave it. We'll go ahead and then they'll join the next one. So just get as much in as you can. And if it doesn't work, then just do something different on the next one. Don't let it put you off and let sort of the virtual socializing slide. Just make sure that you're doing it for the point, which is to socialize, and you're getting something out of it. Don't just do it for the sake of it. We have a weekly chat in the diary, which is just a Teams call, and you join voluntarily. And it's me with all of the trainees. And sometimes there's 2 of us on it. Sometimes there's 5. So just leave it sort of open for anybody to join, and then it doesn't feel like organised fun, because I think that's the main thing, is getting the balance right.
Definitely, that fun by diktat, or company culture by diktat you can feel it when it happens, particularly on the remote calls. Absolutely. The small groups makes a real difference, I think, is because you're more likely to have a gap, because there are less people to be talking at the same time, and less need for the hand raising function and everything else, which can kind of be a bit of a barrier. I did like the fact that you mentioned healthy competition and then mentioned Strava, which was just huge. I think during lockdown, people, particularly when there were all the cyclists, less cars on the road, and everybody was trying to do the same stretch and just trying to get the shortest possible time. And it's a lot of fun, and it's all visible. It all shows up publicly, and it's something that you don't really need to put that much effort into. You don't need to have an organized race of some kind with people monitoring and checking and everything. It's I think it's a really good example.
We did it as a communal sort of step count, because obviously everybody's at different fitness levels, particularly during lockdown. So we just had sort of a step count to get to. It was us versus another team. So it was sort of a group effort and a bit of healthy competition between the 2 teams. So there's different ways you can do it. If you don't instantly think, I'm not a runner, or I'm not like super speed, there are different things you can do.
No, thank you. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Is it, something that is like a step count, or something that is really it's open to to a huge amount of people, whereas something like high speed bike races or whatever it is going to be the minority of.
I would have left the group 100% if that happened.
Even I will admit I like cycling, but I can't. When you get all the lycra and spandex and super, no, I'm not quite in that category. But I know what you mean. Okay, I want to move on to your questions that we've got on the right hand side. So just while we've got the last sort of 20 minutes or so, the first one, I won't read out your names because I'm very conscious of GDPR, and we do record these for YouTube, so I don't want to accidentally name someone who's then going to be put out public. But the first question we have is, any advice on taking breaks and their duration? What if commuting is not an option? How do we balance out self-control when working and not burn out? Really good question.
Yeah, really good question. You've got to be really strict with your self-discipline, and it will feel really unnatural at first, but you've kind of almost got to force yourself. I don't know if you found this, Matt, but you might feel like you've got to force yourself to take a break. It's so easy to be, oh, just one more email, I'll just answer this, or I'll just have, I've started booking time in my diary where that's my allocated lunch. I might have to change it because the day changes, but as long as you know you've got that time in, make sure if you think about how you would take breaks naturally, and for example, when I said before about when I'm in the office, it's a good 5 minutes to walk to get myself a hot drink. There would always be somebody in the canteen, so you'd have a bit of a chat, and then it's a good 5 minutes back. Before you know it, there's at least 15, 20 minutes that you've taken a break. So be kind to yourself and allow yourself that, and don't feel guilty about that in the day. It does feel very unnatural when you're at home because you feel like nobody's sat on somewhere thinking, oh, they're showing as inactive for 15 minutes. So, make sure that you're allowing yourself the breaks, because you're not going to be productive either. So you've got to make sure you're looking after yourself to do the best job. Like I said before, think about creating a commute, taking yourself out for a walk. I feel so much better when I've been outside and had a little bit of fresh air. And I know that's difficult when the weather's not great, but just try and find yourself a spot where if it's not raining, take yourself out and get some fresh air and have a walk around. Because like I said before, normally you kind of have your day, you prepare for your day on your commute, or you're coming home, you can always take yourself out before or after work to compensate.
Definitely, and that I think that the recommendation is 20 minutes outside does wonders for your well-being, and it's not just for your mood, which is obviously your good vitamin D. Even if it's cloudy, even if it's raining, you're still getting vitamin D. But it's good for your digestion. It's good for all kinds of things. There's sort of all manner of health benefits just for getting outside a little bit and getting fresh. And I think the danger zone in taking breaks, I think, is it's not just breaks. It's the first few months that you start a job with. If you're remote working, it's your first time remote working, and it really is, because you find that if you're not really paying attention, or if you're really absorbed in something, you could end up just keep working on into the evening, or you could work straight through lunch, and it's a real danger. I think that happens to a lot of people. It's difficult to keep track of time after a year or so of this. So definitely set those alarms. Like, say, this is going to be my time, and this is what I'm going to get out no matter what. I'm going to go for a walk, and then I'm going to do 20 minutes of that, and then I'm going to 10 minutes to eat, or half an hour to eat, however long you allocated for yourself. But yeah, just get those reminders and alarms and things set up. Make sure that you take care of yourself and get into a habit as soon as you start. If you ever possibly can, because if you start getting into those bad habits in the first few months, then the chances are they're going to continue for longer than you want them to continue. So it was really, really just sensible advice. Just make that your time. Make it for yourself.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, all I was going to say was make sure, even if you just stand up and stretch, just make sure you keep yourself moving. But obviously, we need to move on to the next questions. We need to make sure we get through these.
No, definitely. The movement thing is actually a really good one as well to mention. Is sitting for a long period of time can be really bad for your health. There was an article I was reading the other day that if you exercise high intensity for 10 or 20 minutes a day, it can actually benefit you if you've been sitting for 7 hours or so a day. But if you've been sitting for 11 hours or something a day, actually the benefits become a lot smaller. So definitely do keep yourself moving throughout the day. Next question we have is, do you have any advice on managing difficult colleagues?
I think it depends what the difficulty is there. That's quite difficult for me to pinpoint. I think where possible, I would always recommend to try and get them on camera. And I know that seems like the smallest thing, but you can build up more to engage. I think it does all depend on, like I said, what the difficulty is. Is it a difficulty in communication, for example? Because that would help break down the communication think about your feedback as well, because I think feedback can sound really, really harsh virtually, and you might not intend it that way. So I always have to, whenever I'm giving constructive feedback or anything like that, I really have to think about it and prepare myself, because again, it's the body language thing. There's just something about giving it virtually. It just feels a lot harsher. So just maybe put yourself in the position of who's on the receiving end and think about it that way. But yeah, sorry, that's a little bit vague. It just obviously depends on what the difficulty is. I would just try where possible to utilize the relationship building techniques, little things, like I said, like being on camera and talking as much as possible, which is hard, I know, when it's working remotely, but it's again goes back to having that time.
Definitely, and as you say, I mean, if you have a real problem with a colleague and it's quite a serious issue, then obviously you take it to HR. That's a, you know, assuming things have really gone beyond the kind of beyond what they should have gone beyond, basically. But it is harder, I think, as you say, giving that feedback. I do it. I know I'm guilty of that. When I started working, it was in offices full of journalists, and feedback was very direct, often full of expletives. And you can't do that in the virtual environment. You cannot. The things that's said and are said with a certain tone or inflection in an office don't always come out the same way when you're putting it into Microsoft Teams or into Zoom chat or something like that. So being aware of that, definitely number one. Like, read it back and think, how would another person read this? How would another person understand this? Definitely, absolutely, really kind of good way of judging what you're sending out to people. Thank you, Kate. So I've got a little bit of I'm not entirely certain about the meaning of this question, but I think there's some of this we can answer. If you're working with cross-cultural staff, cross-cultural colleagues, how do you handle the team? As our five fingers are different to the rest of the. So I think the question here really is, if you're working with cross-cultural staff, how can you handle the team if you're doing that remotely? If you've got sort of different cultures that are part of the same Zoom meeting or the same team meetings. Have you got any advice, Kate? I think this is quite a tricky one to kind of identify.
Yeah, I think it's more for me. I'd naturally, this is the way I'm naturally thinking now, I'd want to get an understanding of the different cultures myself, because then you'd have a different approach, and maybe so then it might be that if they were all on the same call, you probably may give a couple of different answers to the same question, because you could pinpoint individuals and say, I know for you that it'd be like this, and I know for you may feel like this, and try and break it down that way. Again, it is quite difficult I don't know the situation that you're referring to, so it can be quite difficult, but I think gaining an understanding, I think one example I could give, so just be mindful of different scenarios. For example, when we speak to the Hong Kong office, it's the littlest thing, but we've always got to be mindful of their time difference. So they're finishing up just as we're starting the day, because they don't want us putting a meeting in at what's lunchtime, our time is their logging off time, if not later, because there's a 7-hour difference. So I know it might not be the case where there's a time difference because you're all within the same team, but just be mindful of the sort of different cultures, and it's the same as working styles. Just be mindful of those different styles, and you might have to adapt yourself a little bit more and feel like you're doing more than just answering the one question, but try and please everybody, which is not an easy job, I know.
Thank you. I think the key thing that you mentioned there is understanding. It's just if you are the one with a different culture interacting with a team that is, more of another culture, then explain what it's about. Try and teach and educate in a very polite, friendly fashion. People are understanding. They do want to learn. If you can all just share a little bit, that makes it easy. As you say, time differences with things. If you've got an office in Hong Kong, I imagine there'll also be holiday differences as well, because Chinese New Year then becomes is much a bigger deal, whereas Christmas people are still working. You think you're sending a message in the morning, but it's actually arriving to them last thing in their day, and it's just being aware of it. I think it requires input from both sides, not just from one person. You can't say this one person is going to handle all these different people from all these different backgrounds. Like, I think you will have to kind of work together and share, and you need to talk about it and be open about it and explain to people what it means if you want to get along and work effectively as a team.
Yeah, because you can't misunderstand them, because if there's somebody who's laid back and that's the culture, then you don't want to misunderstand that as though they're not as engaged or they're not as bothered. It's just that's the culture that it's more laid back. So once you get an understanding, you've nailed it really, because obviously you'll know and you'll adapt your style naturally then.
And that applies to communication styles as well. I mean, in certain professional circles, I'm not going to go off and stereotype or generalize on a whole bunch of countries or anything like that. But sometimes you'll find emails are very direct, and that from certain countries, you'll find I want this and I want this. Thanks, bye. It's very direct, it's very straightforward, and you just have to understand. Well, that's because that's the way that business works, and in that, or maybe it's been translated as well. That's the other thing. Is sometimes you get messages, and maybe English isn't the first language. Okay, so have a look at it. I go, well, I know that there actually isn't this preposition use isn't quite right here or there or whatever it might be, but it's fine. You understand why that is, and you just need to take that in stride. So I hope that's helped you answering that question. We have a quick question that I'm just going to cross off the list very, very quickly because we are running out of time. Sometimes on LinkedIn, there's no message tab. There's only a connect tab. That's because of people's privacy settings. Some people, you need to be connected with them before you can send them a message. Click the connect button first. There you go. I hope that answers your question. I just wanted to knock that one off the list quite quickly. I think we've just kind of covered people sending emails in... okay, no, I see what we're saying. How do you deal with people sending emails which need actioning near the end of the day or out of working hours? What's the best approach?
One tip that we've had is see if you on your email signature, see if you can get your relevant IT department to record your working hours as part of your signature. So mine will say obviously my name, my job title, and then working hours out. We see that for people who have non-working days as well. So you're managing expectations of people you're communicating with because they know when you're in. So that will also help manage. And don't be shy to go back to people and say, thanks for your email. These are the allocated working hours. I will get to your query as soon as possible. Obviously, if it's super, super urgent, we all get those kind of emails sometimes, 5 to 5 standard, and you get something you think I've got to answer that, but they should be rare. You shouldn't be actioning things that that can wait until the next day, but just as long as you manage expectations and send a polite note, then people know to expect it when you're coming back in the next day.
Thank you, and definitely try as well to keep your own personal priority of things that are urgent and things that are not urgent, and try to keep your scale on. Okay, they say this really needs doing today. Does this really need doing today? Talk to the person. Feel free to send them a message saying, I'm really caught up on this, but I can deal with it tomorrow. Feel them out on it. Don't necessarily just feel because you're sent something and everything says it needs to be done immediately. You can't do everything immediately. You have to prioritize. You have to know what you've got to do. Very, very last question, and hopefully we'll actually have managed to get through all the questions. It's one of the few times we've actually managed to do that, which is brilliant. What are some things you can do to change pace during the day when the workload is monotonous? Working on one project for the whole day can be exponentially more tiring.
Oh, we all have these jobs, don't we, that we think, I'll do that later, because you don't want to action it. I think it's about maybe mixing your times up so you're not doing them at the same time every day, because you'll naturally then start to dread, it's coming to 2 o'clock, you know what you've got to do. So sometimes do them in the morning when you're fresh, sometimes save them until, and just where possible, I think with monotonous tasks, for me, I try and break them up. So do a little bit, just chip away at them and then go and do something else. And then it's not as big a task. I always do this with most things, just break it down as much as you possibly can. Even though if it is a big chunk of time and it's a monotonous task, why don't you get yourself a nice little playlist on Spotify that's a little bit more upbeat that you can play in the background, that you can sort of nod along to as you're doing the task. There are some really sort of simple hacks like that just make it ever so slightly easier. But unfortunately, we do all have those in every type of role, don't we, Matt, where there's always that piece of work where you think, oh, I've got to that again today, but you've got to get it done. So just try and make it as easy as you possibly can by either breaking it down or trying to get it a little bit more upbeat.
And make sure you utilize your breaks as well. This is what we talked about earlier. Make sure you set aside time for that. But yeah, definitely really good advice there. Try to get your Spotify playlist, break it up if you can. And I hope that answers your question. I think we have run out of time for today. So I just want to say thank you very much to Kate Eady, Graduate Advisor at Edwards Goddard, for joining us. Kate, is there anywhere you'd like to direct people to if they want to find out more information or anything you'd recommend?
Please feel free to add me on LinkedIn if you want more information. We've also got obviously a website, but I don't mind. You'll be pleased to know you can message me. You don't have to connect with me on LinkedIn. So if you want to ask me any questions, please feel free to do so. I just want to thank you for your time and coming along.
Thank you to all of you for asking questions. And like if you found this session useful, please let us know in the chat, or you could also share this on LinkedIn once it goes live, or just drop us a little message on LinkedIn to Target Jobs. We would really appreciate that. I think the next webinar we have is also going to be related to solicitors firms. We're looking at VAC schemes and training contracts, which is going to be on the 10th of June. So I think that's 2 Thursdays' time is the next Target Jobs webinar. Thank you very much once again for joining us, Kate. And hopefully we will see you all in the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.